Hello, Mastermind. So, I'm wanting to get on today to talk a bit more about self-compassion and how it ties into the Fairness Code. I believe this is such an important key part in the Fairness Code, and it explains a lot about resentment and how harshness can creep into our relationships and how we can move out of that kind of harshness and create more softness in our relationships. All right, so I want to set the scene for you. So we have to start very broadly and look at broader systems in life, at the sort of cultural level, government level, things like that. And there's a real dynamic of power and control in a lot of the systems that we operate in. And what I mean by power and control is that if someone behaves in a way that is not accepted or acceptable, then there'll be a quick consequence or punishment, and it's usually quite harsh, and it usually involves a bit of shame in the delivering of that consequence. Shaming and scolding, and this sort of idea that, how could you have done that? And you've been a bad person. Okay, so this sort of power and control dynamic is very prevalent, I believe, in society and has been for many millennia. So because these power and control dynamics have been prevalent in these systems for so long, these systems that we've been a part of, I believe that we've been conditioned to believe that punishment is warranted and necessary and ought to be used in relationships as a way to achieve fairness and balance. And the only way that we can do this is through punishment. And that really is what captures the punitiveness schema, this idea that life is very black and white, and if you've done the wrong thing, then you deserve a punishment, and people who have done good deserve rewards, and it's very black and white, and not a lot of grey, not a lot of room for human error, actually. Okay, but we also need to consider that punishment really blocks connection. When we're punishing others, if we're being punishing or punitive towards someone that we have a close connection with, then we're actually using shame. We're actually shaming that person. We're scolding them. There might even be a little bit of contempt creep into our message. The way that we deliver our message might have a bit of contempt creep in, and we might sort of demonstrate this disdain for our loved ones as we are communicating the rule that they broke. Okay, so say if our partner said that they were going to bring dinner home this evening and then they forgot to do it. If we felt upset or even frustrated or a little bit invisible or left out, we could communicate that disappointment in a very punitive way, in a very scolding way, even using non-verbals like rolling the eyes, going, I can't believe you forgot that again. I can't ever rely on you. And you can really see the shaming that's coming out in that expression of frustration. There's no compassion there. There's no forgiveness for that error. And there's also no assumption of the good intentions of the partner in that instance. So that punishing delivery is cutting. You could almost say it's like getting a knife and it's delivering a bit of a cut. Okay, now if you did that over and over again in your relationship, then that's going to create a lot of resentment in the partner who feels like they're always being punished because they see themselves as innocent and well-intentioned. Okay, so can you see how punishment really blocks connection? Because the person on the receiving end can sense the harshness, can really sense that there's a harshness in it and feel like it's unwarranted, unjustified to take such a harsh stance. But the problem is that if there's been a lot of punishment in someone's history, in someone's early child environment, then sadly they will tolerate punishment from us because they believe that that's just normal. It's normal to be in punitive systems. It's normal to be scapegoated. It's normal to not be forgiven for your mistakes. So they won't stand up for themselves if they're on the receiving end of all this harshness. It's very devastating because over time it will lead to an erosion of the relationship because it doesn't feel safe to be around someone who's so harsh, someone who's so cutting. All right? So in other words, the person on the receiving end of that harshness will believe that they have no right to protest the harshness, protest the punishment, because it's all around them. They believe that this is warranted, that this is just how relationships operate, right? So the way out of this is to create systems and relationships and environments that invite softness. Okay, so how can we invite softness, more softness into our relationships? Is through compassion. All right, and it's very hard to give other people compassion, to be empathic to their suffering, to be understanding of their point of view if we're not giving ourselves compassion. So if there's no self-compassion and softness within, and a forgiveness of ourselves and our own errors and mistakes and flaws, then there's sort of the way that our ego works is to say, why should I forgive them for an error over something that I wouldn't even forgive myself for? Okay, so you can see how self-compassion is associated with compassion for other people. The more forgiving we are of ourselves and our own errors and mistakes and our humanity, the more forgiving and patient we're going to be with our loved ones, because we're going to see ourselves as innocent and well-intentioned in the same way that we see our partners as innocent and well-intentioned. And if you find yourself in a system or a relationship that feels intentionally punishing and harsh, then I think it really does invite us to ponder whether we're in the right relationship. Are we in the right work environment? Are we in the right friendship circle? Or are we in the right intimate relationship if there's just punishment after punishment after punishment and harshness and no grace? Okay? And I really hope that as we move forward and as humanity evolves, over the next little while, over the next decade, that we start to see more softness appear in our relationships. Okay, I'd like to see more internal softness, that we are gentle with ourselves, that we forgive ourselves, that we see ourselves as innocent and well-intentioned deep down, and that we extend that to the people around us, that we also can see the good nature in our loved ones, and we're generous with our forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean the same as not having boundaries, just to be clear. Rachel did a brilliant webinar last week on healthy boundaries. I loved it. So there's nothing cruel about setting healthy boundaries. That's just explaining to someone where your line is. Say, here's my line, please don't do that. Or no, I can't help today. There's nothing cruel about that. That's just you being honest about the limitations of your energy. Okay? Now, setting a boundary allows us to be more forgiving in our relationships, because we know that our boundaries for the most part are getting honoured. So then, of course, we're going to be more generous with our forgiveness when errors inevitably do occur. All right. So we want to see a bit more giving the benefit of the doubt. And we can do that when we have healthy boundaries. So hopefully you can see how reciprocity and self-compassion really come into the fairness code. So the final thing that I want to say on this topic is to embody self-compassion. It all starts with developing and cultivating this soft inner voice in the face of errors that we make. Okay, so say if I don't know, made a mistake at work or something like that, or wasn't perfectly attuned to a client and they picked up on it. And as I'm driving home, usually my critic would want to beat up on me and tell me how I should have done it better and I should have been, more attuned, etc. And my more compassionate inner voice will say, you're doing a good job, Tracy. You showed up. Your intentions are good. It's okay to not be perfect all the time. It's okay to make mistakes. Deep down, I know my intentions are good. Okay, and that's a self-compassionate voice. It's forgiving. It gives grace and forgiveness and patience. Okay, so when you speak in that voice more often to yourself, then naturally you're going to want to extend that to other people when they make these innocent mistakes and give them the benefit of the doubt and allow them to explain what's going on. Okay, so I trust that this has helped you see how self-compassion is related to compassion, and both of those create an inner sense of fairness and justice in our life because there's no harsh punishments. Okay, so you've heard the saying, when the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Well, many of us have experienced in our childhoods punishments that didn't fit the crime, that didn't take into account our innocence, didn't take into account even our developmental age, and it just lacked that softness that as children we really need. And then we internalize that and bring that into our adult lives. All right, everyone, please let us know what that brings up for you. We'll be happy to coach you through any things that this brings up for you regarding punitiveness, regarding any blocks to self-compassion, and how this all ties into stepping away from resentment and towards more equanimity, which is the essence of the Fairness Code.